Let's see. A lot of people oftentimes ask about reptiles and amphibians in the hobby. They do. Oftentimes, you get asked about turtles. You get asked about, there's a huge reptile community, and oftentimes we were talking about this. You've got reptile people that are awesome, and you've got fish people, and they're awesome. But oftentimes, you never see the two cross. So if you get a reptile person trying to keep an aquarium, they go, "Wow, these tentacle snakes are impossible," and they say they are for advanced keepers. It's not particularly that they're for advanced keepers; they just are not familiar with how to keep an aquarium. So trying to keep an aquarium can be even more challenging. It adds another level that they're not familiar with. So we're going to try to cover a lot of the species that are found in the hobby, and I am going to cover all sorts of oddball, fully aquatic species. FYI, a lot of these I will list and tell you about them, and then tell you that they are illegal in our countries, or they are highly endangered. You will never see these things, but they're kind of cool to know about, so I will share that information with y'all. I am also going to be relying on Chris Maddox here. Chris is probably the biggest weird aquatic reptile amphibian keeper here in Houston. And Heather, who is a huge paludarium builder and also keeps some of these aquatic reptiles. There's just a handful of us. A lot of them are just rare. Let's see, I've got a list, so I'm just going to kind of work down our list, and if you guys have anything, just jump right in. Lizards. Arguably, there's not very many. Most lizards are marginal. They take to the water to kind of hide or for protection. I mean, a basilisk was really cool because they'll run across the water, but they generally don't live in the water.
Someone soak it also helps them shed, like there are snakes that'll, almost any snake go into the water and help shed it, but they don't really need.
There's the Cayman lizard, which would probably be
One of
the most aquatic of them, but really it spends over half its time outside of it.
They're more tourist.
Yeah.
It's a hunting ground and it's an escape from predators.
Yeah.
All their time they're going to spend lounging.
Yeah. Marine iguanas, they go and eat algae in the water when the tide comes up, but they're going to get out of the water. They don't live in the water, per se. Moving on to turtles. This is one that everybody asks about. They're like, "Oh, I want a turtle."
Just don't.
Turtles are very, very dirty. There are a handful that live fully in the water their entire life. They might just leave for, laying eggs and things like that, but they do live a primarily aquatic life. Most turtles would be kind of considered marginal. They bask, so they need UVA, UVB lights. We're not going to talk about red-eared sliders and the myriad. There's thousands if you get into that chapter. Alligator snapping turtles literally live entirely in the water. They're amazingly cool. They're also endangered, and you can't keep them. So they're massive turtles.
They have a hell of a life.
Yeah,
massive means you would need a huge setup. And yes.
More like a pool.
Yeah.
They're very dangerous.
Yeah.
But they'll take it.
ADG had one for years until they became endangered, and then they had to get rid of it. So,
which an old saying I would say to anybody putting in any animal is if it has a mouth, it can bite.
Yeah.
Some just more severe than others.
If it has a very big, very sharp mouth, it can bite really hard.
Side neck turtles. They are primarily South American and African. Occasionally you see them. They're probably the most normal looking of the turtles that you can get. They've kind of got a weird hinged neck. So it's always a right hand or a left-handed one. So they always go that way. They're not particularly difficult, but they need a lot of room. You're going to want at least 120 to 180 gallon sort of setup. They're much more turtle looking than a lot of the others. One of the members of that family is the Mata Mata. It is primarily aquatic. A very cool turtle. They used to go for 500 to 1,000 each. They've dropped down to where it's like 100 to 300 each. They're from South America. They are primarily a piscivore, so they're going to eat fish. They actually have a very unique hunting habit. Instead of a snapping turtle that bites, it actually is like a Hoover vacuum. Its neck is inflatable, so it actually will suck in everything, and then it just closes its jaws, and it lets out the water, and lo and behold, it's got the fish.
One of the most unique looking species.
Yeah.
But also, like, snappers, this is a turtle that is very large.
Yes, this would need 180 to probably
You're
240.
gonna need 3 times the filtration of
Yeah.
what it's
And then
rated.
also being a turtle, your filtration has to be very high.
One that we oftentimes see in Houston, which is super cool, is the fly river turtle. That was kind of the weird missing link for a lot of time. We knew that sea turtles existed with those cool flippers, but most turtles are primarily freshwater. So we knew that there had to be a middle step in there somewhere, and we finally found it, maybe, in the 2000s? It wasn't
Yeah,
very
maybe
long.
late 1990s. It wasn't
Yeah.
that long ago when they started describing.
And they're from Papua New Guinea, but they're from very, very non-industrialized areas. This is pretty dangerous regions. You know, we're talking some headhunter kind of like real crazy, like tribal kind of areas. This is not like, yeah. The fly rivers are actually, they look like sea turtles where they've got flippers. They require massive tanks. They're extremely expensive, and they're arguably going to be CITES listed. So breeding them in captivity has proven very difficult.
They kill each other.
Yeah.
Always.
You'd need a very large system. You know, you're talking like ponds or lake size to breed
I've heard
these.
zoos have even had troubles keeping
Oh,
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually when you see one on the market, they will go from anywhere from about $3,000 to about $6,000 per. So this is not a casual like, oh hey, I'm going to go get one for my birthday. Yeah, yeah. You know, this is one that you are going to dedicate some really hardcore stuff for. Arguably, what I usually recommend for most people for turtles is mud and musk turtles. They are the smallest. They usually only get to 4 to 6 inches. They don't mind being fully aquatic. They're naturally found around here. But their name gives a good indicator. They have a very strong musk smell. They don't get the name stink pot for nothing. So that cute little turtle in your house is going to be a hot mess of a wow, what just died in this room. It is a very cute turtle that you will go, I don't know if I really want a turtle.
If you remember the 135-gallon Paludarium that I did like a year and a half ago, that was the turtle that I had in there. Needless to say, it was rehomed within a month. And it was donated to school, actually, the School of Scientology. So it's
And
just,
they're
it's
really
so hard.
good piscivores. I mean, honestly, you go up fishing in like Lake Conroe,
Big down
you
ponds.
will pull up musk turtles left and right. And these things are eating
Pretty
constantly.
much just miniature snapper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly it.
Speaking of eating, we're going over a lot of reptiles, and we'll eventually hit some amphibians and stuff like that. These things eat fish.
Yeah.
So you're going to keep them in an aquarium. Some of them, like these,
They'll leave little
Musks
tails floating.
and you know, they're fine with some bigger fish, but keep
Even
in mind there's an inherent risk.
Yeah,
They could attach
yeah. There is no magic turtle pellet fairy in the wild that feeds these things. No, they eat fish. Most of these things, if they live completely in the water, their diet's going to be fish.
Even the ones that you don't, if you do a mix, there's always a risk.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
just
That
brought it up
that
too.
gorgeous frontosa is going to have a bite.
There was a turtle in the tank where we were at last month.
Oh yeah, that's Fly River. Yeah, it was a Fly River. They call them a pig-nosed turtle. That's the weird step between.
The leatherbacks, the greens, there's 3 big species in the ocean. Yeah, and then you got the Fly River that is freshwater that has the paddle.
Right.
Yeah, the soft shells next to the fish pellet, trailing water, you know, so the process sliders. Yeah.
So that's pretty much, honestly, that's turtles. I mean, to be honest, they're not the best choice. They really do best. Almost all of these are going to be doing best in a dedicated species, sort of species or a specimen tank that you're willing to do the time and effort. My recommendation usually is big canisters. You know, amp up your bio to handle those ammonia spikes, because when it decides to exhaust itself, it's big.
Yeah, if you keep fish with it, just accept that you might not be successful with the fish.
Yeah.
And they kill them for no reason. like
Turtles
you said.
also have a lot of personalities.
Yes.
All the species. So if you go that direction, you're going to get something that is enjoyable, where you might not necessarily need the fish to liven up the tank.
Right.
And another thing to point out is that, we've mentioned, turtles need large tanks, but a good rule of thumb is about 10 gallons of water per inch of shell width. So even if you're looking at something that, that's the bare minimum. Even if you're looking at something as small as a mud turtle or musk turtle, you're looking at a 50-gallon tank.
I had mine
Yeah.
at 135, and it still wasn't enough.
Yeah, and honestly, like the more filter you can get, we're talking big, FX5s, FX6s, 2262s, big tanks, and do massive water changes. Usually we advocate for like every 2 weeks doing basically a flush, and
Yeah.
you just put a drain on that tank, drain it out to your yard, and take a hose and just spray it out. Because I mean,
You might want to spray your yard out afterwards.
Yeah.
Which is fine as far as your chemistry with the turtles, they can handle it, but fish are not.
yeah, your fish aren't going to be too happy with that.
Well, one of the big things about reptiles in general is that they process waste differently than fish do. Fish just kind of excrete ammonia, but reptiles, because they started out on the land as a lineage, and what they did there to avoid dehydration and to avoid moisture loss is they actually refine that ammonia into uric acid, which is a lot more concentrated and it's actually a lot less toxic. And then they excrete that. But the trouble with that is that in an aquatic environment, when they defecate, what's going to happen is that uric acid then goes, it basically is just goes into ammonia, and it's extremely concentrated. Anytime you go into a dedicated, exotic reptile or bird or whatever shop where the animals are producing that uric acid, that's why you always get that twang of ammonia when you come in, is that uric acid decomposing and releasing that ammonia. So, they're not going to be constantly producing waste like fish are, but when they do, they just bomb the tank. And it just gets really disgusting really, really quick.
Agreed.
Oh, yeah.
So that kind of covers turtles. Do we have any turtle-related questions? Turtles. All right. We're going to move on to snakes. Snakes are cool. There's a lot of marginal snakes. They kind of hang out in the water, and they go and they hunt in the water, or they kind of use the water as cover. We're not going to try to cover those because really you need a paludarium sort of setup, and you're talking about a large. We're going to focus primarily on entirely aquatic or primarily aquatic species. So the first one that comes to mind is tentacled snakes. And for that, I'm going to let Chris kind of go over it. He's got some. They're hard to find in the hobby. They're really neat.
Not a whole lot to say. Unfortunately, snakes aren't very exciting. They don't do a whole lot. Like I said, turtles have personalities. Snakes, you know, some will. This particular species, fully aquatic, comes out of Southeast Asia. Likes really like what you would keep a beta or find beta fish in. Bogs and a lot of vegetation, very acidic water. They eat fish. You're not going to feed them anything else. They are one of the very rare species of reptile that actually needs to get out and sunbathe. Most species of reptiles need to get out and absorb UVA and UVB. Unlike majority of them, this species stays in the water. Elephant trunk, you have one.
The files.
Also, another species that.
He comes out a lot, especially when you put feeder fish in there.
Right, they will come out, but they, and the same thing with an anaconda. I don't know. Elephant trunk is also Asian.
Yeah.
It also likes more acidic water. Anacondas definitely more acidic water. This is where, for a turtle, you're not really concerned with pH and water parameters. Snakes, these particular species, you absolutely have to be aware of, and because they can shock.
And tentacled snakes arguably they don't ever need to leave the water. They actually give live birth, so they don't have to lay eggs.
That is the difference between a lot of species.
Your file snake actually has to get out on land and lay
They'll
eggs.
lay eggs.
Now, something about tentacles that's kind of neat, that I've been trying to twist some arms in the hobby, is that they are absolute huge fans of planted tanks. They actually grab vegetation with their tail, and they will just basically lay there in the current. And they've got long tentacles, like weird appendages off their nostrils.
It's called the J shape. They'll hook their head down and they'll just hover there, just wait for fish to swim by.
Yeah,
And they are
snap.
lightning quick.
And I've always thought that that'd be a gorgeous species to put into a planted tank. But yes,
That's
they're
actually what you want to keep.
yeah.
One of the really cool things with tentacle snakes is the hunting mechanism that they have. Not just the fact that they're hanging down like that, but what they'll do. I think it was 3 years ago. They shot some footage and slowed it down with the camera. And what they were seeing them do is they'd actually flinch one way, and the fish would instinctively start turning and flying away, and then the snake would come back, and the fish would basically just angle itself perfectly and slide down
That's
the
why
snake's mouth.
the J shape of the body. They're also, this particular species is actually a fang. It has venom, but it's specific to fish. So, like I said, if it has a mouth, it can bite you. The chances of getting bit by it are super rare, and it won't do anything except draw some blood. Snakes have very small, very sharp teeth.
Yeah, another thing to note there is that in the state of Texas, you do need a permit to keep on the snakes. They probably are not going to bust you for that. Yeah. All non-indigenous venomous as well as most of them. Yeah. The permit is $20 a pound. Yeah. Or anywhere that sells efficient. Go get it. It's a good safe.
Well, it's
Two other freshwater species that arguably are entirely aquatic is the yellow and green anacondas. I'm not certain if you've ever heard of the term anaconda, but let's just say that they get really big. Imagine that turtle and imagine the waist load. Now imagine something that's almost 30 feet.
nothing like the movie you saw.
Yeah.
They don't move like that.
Honestly, anacondas rarely ever leave. Usually the females will, to lay eggs, that's the only reason they leave the water.
Yeah, they don't lay eggs.
Oh, they don't lay eggs?
Yeah,
Okay.
live birds.
All right, well then, there you go.
They don't even leave the water to do
The reason why they don't leave the water is because their bodies are so massive.
Yeah.
And they like
easier
more
for
like where
Yeah,
they can
arguably
still bask with
The rock pythons in them are the same in length, but an anaconda is almost double to triple the weight because
They're huge.
yeah,
They're massive.
yeah, they're just a massive snake, and that's where they get that biggest snake is because they can move around in the water because the water allows them that.
Well, any
And when you
snake
live in
can
the
eat a
Amazon,
deer.
there's a lot
Right.
of water.
Or
Um,
fish.
Or
Now I'll walk into something completely illegal. They're not allowed in the United States. You can't keep them, but that is sea snakes in sea crates. The difference between the two is sea crates come out to actually lay eggs, so they have to have an atoll or a reef or something where they can get out and actually lay eggs, an exposed area. Sea snakes give live birth, so they don't literally ever need to go to land. They've lost all connection to land, but arguably they can only dive about 50, 60, 100 foot, so they're not going to cross the Pacific Ocean. It gets deep, and they're like, well, they're not going to find a whole lot of food.
these are absolutely venomous.
Yeah, these are related to cobras. They will mess you
They're
up.
just super docile, so when you see divers messing with them, it's because they just
Now, arguably, there is an oddball that I absolutely adore. I've never seen them in a zoo. I've never seen them on an open market. I only see about a half a dozen articles that I can even find online about them, but that is the lake tall snake, or the only freshwater sea snake. Lake Tall used to be actually a lagoon, and as that island picked up, that lagoon became a lake, and the rainwater has slowly replaced it. So over about 50,000 years, this sea snake got trapped, and now it's found completely in freshwater. But they've kind of argued about, has this evolved enough from what it came from that it actually is now a unique species, or is this just simply a weird geographic variant?
Long drip
Potato.
The argument is this particular snake, because it was in saltwater, it has a more of a paddle tail, whereas the other species we talked about have, your typical, tail
Snake
like
shape.
any other snake.
Yeah.
So that,
I've never seen one. I don't even know how available they are. Mentions from the lake do say that they're rare in the lake. So I don't imagine that you're going to just wander into a random pet store and be like, dude, Lake Tall Snake. Inherently, this is also a cobra relative. So probably not going to be common in the hobby either. But it is a freshwater sea snake, which I always find is a nice conundrum. That's kind of the jumbo shrimp things.
right.
That's the only time I have to deal with. That's the only time they've been able to touch them on my documentary. So.
Exactly.
They're Philippines, right? So
Yeah.
Philippines doesn't allow reptile exports.
No, they don't allow
So they're
exports,
very-
but whenever they're doing the live documentaries on it, like they Admiral,
Yeah.
all those, that's the only time they've ever actually been able to catch them on camera coming down the board. So there's not even go there and visit. You're not going to see them probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, the scientists.
That moves us from reptiles, that pretty much covers all of our reptiles, into amphibians. Amphibians you're going to find are actually more common in the hobby. The first is newts. Pluridelinae is their whole kind of family. One thing about newts, they have a strong aquatic phase, and then they will shift. Usually it is temperature, seasonal. They will shift into what they refer to as an eft phase. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of an eft phase, but it all of a sudden turns into a salamander and it wanders around on the land and it's like, hey, you're cool. And then it goes and finds things, and then it goes back into its newt phase. And it can go and shift back and forth from this phase. So inherently you could keep that awesome alpine newt in your aquarium until it became an eft. And then you'd have to offer it some dry area, a moist environment, where it chilled for a little bit until it decided that it needed to go back into the water.
Newts, like Roy's saying, is primarily aquatic, but they do need to get out. They need to go through the stages. Salamanders are going to be the opposite. Also, amphibians, which are going to be different than your, but also different than most reptiles, is they absorb moisture through their skin, so they are highly affected by your water conditions.
And
parameters.
and they also secrete toxins. All amphibians secrete toxins, so mixing them with fish can be very tricky and usually not recommended.
And part of it's just that most of these amphibians are going to prefer much cooler water than most
Yeah,
tropical
so that-
People have to keep it chilly.
Amphibians, yes, definitely. It's hot here in Houston. I mean, even if you get into your tropical dark frogs, I've had more problems with them overheating.
Yes.
Yeah.
The room I keep
There-
mine in, it's
And
colder than
there
most
are
now.
exceptions, and we'll kind of cover those. The next we walk into is axolotls. Again, one that we see a lot of people that are really into. This is a salamander that never gets over its juvenile phase. All salamanders are going to have that larval. Imagine a tadpole. That's kind of what an axolotl is. It just never gets out of that phase.
This is why you don't want to mix fish with them. They have exposed gills.
Yes.
Fish will nip at them.
They'll nip at them, or the axolotl will just start biting them. Believe it or not, you
They'll
get
hunt
a
fish.
good 6-7 inch axolotl, and that thing can do some damage. You know, it will bite you. Yeah. They're really a neat species. They like it a little bit cooler. Unless you've got your house chilling like a polar bear, like my lovely wife, my lovely wife with her chilly house. But usually they like it really a lot colder than most people. If you're running at 75 in your house, it's too hot. You're going to have to start looking at chilling. Most axolotls don't like it that cold. And honestly, an issue that I've seen with a lot of axolotls is people end up having very polluted water. They get detritus worms, and they won't eat those detritus worms, and I've seen them get into their skin and get infected. Yeah, parasitics. So keeping that water clean and really doing your water changes. I've heard a lot of issues with impaction as well. People keeping them inside of gravel, and when they go to eat, they're just really dumb. And they will just eat gravel. And then it will impact their
Amphibians, especially ones that they'll suck worms in.
They have that,
And if
yeah.
you're you've got to be real careful with the substrate you have. They can get it in. A lot of times you see them, they'll spit it out, but sometimes they don't.
yeah. The next one is mud puppies. Oh,
Oh, you might be there. I was just going to say, are axolotls and what they call water dogs or something? Is that what they're
no, different group. They are nominally related, but way back. Arguably, axolotls are actually members of true salamanders. They never lost that juvenile stage. Like tiger salamanders, you can see them and they look like mud puppies when they're little, and eventually they lose that and they come out as salamanders. So mud puppies are a different line of the family, and they share that sort of axolotl. They never lose those external gills. The problem with mud puppies is they need cold water. Really,
Just to the eastern part of the United States, like the Carolinas.
and there's some found
It's
around
cold water.
around here, but those are in deeper areas that could support that species. There is
Right?
one.
The water, actually.
There's one species of mud puppies that are not found around here, and those are the ohms. If you've ever been really cool and are a huge amphibian geek and seen an ohm, they actually are from the Eastern Europe area, and whenever there's huge floods in that area, it'll actually wash out these weird cave salamanders that look like tiny dragons. They're albino cave salamanders, and that's an ohm. There was a lot of myths about them in Eastern Europe, but
spell that?
OLM. They look a lot like a Texas cave salamander.
They got a real thin body.
Yeah, they've got a-
like Roy said, they kind of look like a Chinese dragon.
Yeah, OLM. Ohm. They're neat. I don't know.
They're void of colors because they live in caves.
Yeah, they live in caves, but they're arguably the only other member of that mud puppy group. And I was kind of surprised that they tied them in
Yeah.
instead of tying them in with the cave salamanders, but it turns out they're not related. So I thought it was neat. Sorry, I get into weird, like, what's related to what? The next thing, some cave salamanders. got a whole bunch of really cool cave salamanders. They're found all over the world. Many of them are primarily aquatic. They live entirely, but arguably almost all of them are way off your list. You cannot get them. They're only found in one cave system or two cave systems, so they're all endangered, critically endangered, because one weird instance or a hiccup and the whole population is devastated.
Down in like aquariums and stuff,
Yeah.
so they're just straight up.
Yeah, unless it floods,
Yeah.
you know, you don't see them. But they are aquatic. They usually eat bat guano, which is awesome. I'm not certain where you would get a massive collection of bat
There's not a lot
guano.
of food down there. They'll eat whatever they find.
Yeah, I think it'd be neat.
Of all the things I wanted to try,
Way back when I got into the hobby, like maybe in the 80s, there was a salamandery thing. It was kind of green, a little red in it, had external
Probably
feathers.
axolotl.
Axolotl.
Yeah,
I
They
guess
probably had the
I never got
green
into
in it.
it.
That's why I had the greenish
The shop I
tinge.
worked for carried them for a while.
They were a lot more popular then.
Yeah, I was about to say that. And they've seen a resurgence lately. But
Yeah. Well, there's also a lot of restrictions between us and Mexico, and that's where a lot of them are coming. Which probably next on the list is rubber eels.
Right. Amphibians.
Yeah,
But, yeah.
amphibians, yeah.
So
Get into that rubber eels. Same thing. They used to be very, very common in the hobby, and then but the restrictions
Well,
between us and
They
Mexico.
fill in
I
one
was
of
gonna
those
say, I thought
lakes.
Mexico made restrictions on
What's that?
being
Oxalotls only native to 2 lakes in Mexico.
Yes.
They filled one in.
Yeah.
yes,
The other one's highly polluted.
yeah. So arguably they're extinct in the wild.
Yeah, so
They're
that's just the
completely
trade.
extinct. So they're only kept alive in the hobby. The axolotls are one of those cool stories. And what's weird is the same lake that the axolotls come from is also where Amica splendens comes from, which is the butterfly goodwin. And they're extinct there as well. Same problem. So it's neat that we have two species that are extinct in the
We
wild.
got the roseline barbs as well.
Roselines are from northern
They're
India,
nearly
but yeah.
extinct in the wild. And I mean, what, they're
It's
15
easier
bucks
to
on
grow
the
that, though,
trade.
than-
Yeah, well, with breeding, you know,
They
once
finally
the,
started breeding them in captivity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a,
And which was weird because they just started popping up, what, 15 years ago?
yeah. Well, it used to be really hard to get them because you went almost 14. It was a 14-hour drive to the nearest airport in India. So they would basically get these things in buckets, and nobody could afford battery-powered air pumps.
They couldn't get
So
in
this
there
is
for-
some crazy dudes in India with some nets and some buckets going
they eat them over there.
14 hours to the nearest airport, going at insane amount speeds, trying to get them to an airport to get them on a plane to get them out. So these silly little barbs would cost a ridiculous amount, because I remember them being going for 120 each. And then once they got enough of them, they could breed them. Then
Yeah, once they started breeding them, about somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago,
yeah,
then now they're kind of a regular hobby.
It's like with milk puppies, I don't know too much about their breeding. They don't really have too much they can do with that.
you know, honestly, if you're ever hunting mud puppies, the cheapest spot for mud puppies, dude, go to bait shops. A lot of weird bait shops will have mud puppies for sale because they use them as for bait.
The best.
But, dude, I kid you not, it's so sad. You're like, oh no, dude.
It's
You,
sad, but
if
you
you,
can
but
get
you're,
them really cheap that
yeah,
way.
you can get them really cheap, dude. And if you want to try playing around with them, that's probably the easiest route to that.
Right.
Let's see, the next, Amphiumas. These are a weirdo. They're found locally here. I remember catching my first one, and let me tell you what, dude, I thought it was a 2.5 foot snake. It looked really awesome. I went to grab it in the water, and it was really slimy and really kind of rubbery, and it immediately turned around and it drew blood. Dude,
Oh, yeah.
that thing has got teeth
These are
and
often thought of big
meat.
black snakes, yeah. And
Yeah.
before you know, everyone goes, "Oh, snakes are slimy," which they're not. This is it's an amphibian. It is absolutely slimy,
Oh yeah.
and they are absolutely mean.
Don't they secrete mucus?
Yes,
Oh yeah.
they secrete mucus that's to protect their skin.
Oh yeah.
And they are affected by it's to help them protect them from their environment. I recommend eating nothing with them. They get very big.
Yeah.
They are aggressive.
2 to 3 foot. Some of them will even push 3 foot.
I unfortunately learned the hard way many years ago by keeping one that was about 2 feet long in a semi-aquatic environment, and it would get in the mud and hide in the mud, and I threw in a very expensive Malaysian leaf frog that I just got in, and the wife, I was working on a set in the middle of the night, and the wife called and said there's a lot of commotion in there, and came home and they was trying to eat the frog, even though the frog was bigger than my fist, and the frog unfortunately didn't make it. So,
Yeah, so that's why I do these.
it's like a lot of reptiles, you're playing with fire when you mix them with stuff.
Yeah.
They eat fits in their mouth.
Amphiumas, there's a couple of species. They differentiate by the amount of toes they have on these tiny little arms. There's a 2-toed and a 3-toed. Suffice it to say, they're pretty much the same.
Which can go the other way. If you put fish in there,
Yeah.
they could bite those legs off.
Yes. They do exist. They are primarily aquatic. They are out there.
Yeah, they'll stay in the water.
If you want to try one, dude, tell us how your story goes. Sirens. Sirens are another that a lot of times people will confuse with amphiumas. They've got, some of the species have an external gill. They just look a little bit different.
These aren't completely black with a gray belly. They're speckled. There's the greater. Yeah, or a mud puppy face.
Yeah.
These things are actually way more docile. You kind of keep them with fish. The problem with them is the external gills,
Yep.
and their arms a little bit bigger. There's the greater siren, bigger, the lesser siren, and the dwarf version.
And the dwarf version's really pretty.
Really pretty. Only gets about 8 inches long. Really thin, like pencil thin. Lateral stripes down the bottom.
Yep.
Very.
They're really neat. They're just, a lot of native amphibians have a lot of weird rules when it comes to collecting and trading them. So oftentimes it's easier to actually collect them yourself than to, find some. Sourcing them can be hard.
Yeah, very difficult sources.
Yeah.
They will spend the majority of the time in water.
Yeah, and a lot of times they just bury down in mud and you just can't.
Vegetation.
Yeah, you go out, waiting and you catch 2 of them over a couple of days. So the
dwarf
price that
species
you have
are
to
hardly
charge
ever-
for those would be ridiculous.
You're not going to find the horses. The bigger ones, just out of size, yeah, you get dumb luck. You see them, they're hunting or looking to breed. They are also, what I've experienced with these in the tanks, is they're very active, very out, very open. They swim around, they have a lot of personality. Carefully hand feed them. I know that's like carefully. They don't see very good, and they can bite you. Not like the amphibia, where it's going to be real bad, but they'll still bite you.
Yeah. Let's see. All right, so next up is Sicilians. These are really weird. Most people have only seen them in a weird biology class where you kind of go, there's frogs and toads, and there's salamanders and newts, and then there's these other branch that they call Sicilians. They're like worms, they live in the ground, nobody ever sees them.
Which is kind of like where we're at with the siren. It's just a smaller species. What used to be very common in the hobby
Yeah,
20 plus years ago was what I was talking about earlier, was rubber eels.
rubber eels is what you'll
like
see
a
them
very
marked as.
small version of the amphibia. Used to see them all the time in fish stores, but then there was regulation, and you can't see them.
Yeah, and
Also, another thing that was very, fully aquatic, swim around. It was live birth, bred very easy in captivity. Swim around, a lot of people keep them with fish. Just got to be.
yeah, honestly, Sicilians are probably, arguably, one of the better ones that I have seen in a community tank. They're not an abysmal nightmare. They actually do real well. They're from Colombia, so inherently a South American sort of biotope would be a really cool addition for these. They look like a big giant rubber eel with 2 eyes. They'll breathe air. They give a live birth. Their birthing is very unique. If you haven't heard me go and expound upon its coolness, catch me. They arguably have the closest thing to like a weird mammalian bird that I've ever anticipated. And for this thing to be related to frogs and salamanders is amazing. I mean, if you see the care that a toad gives to its offspring, which is zero, these things actually have an egg that will hatch into almost a tadpole that lives into a primitive oviduct, and it scrapes this inside oviduct lining, and it will grow in there until it's large enough to get birthed naturally. So all of a sudden, people were getting these things in, and all of a sudden they had more than they had, and they went, "Wait a minute, dude! I didn't see a little one. Like this one's like 3 or 4 inches." Well, yeah, that's the size they give birth, which is neat for something that arguably we thought was basically just blind amphibious worms that lived in the dirt. For them to have that advanced a reproduction system is really cool for something that, yeah, this is a legless, limbless, usually blind amphibian. It's neat.
There are a couple of species that are semi-aquatic and would need a setup where they would get out, especially with sometimes the birthing process. But the one that I was speaking of is commonly called rubber eel.
Yeah, Typhonectes natans is usually the ones that we end up seeing in the hobby. There's a bunch of them, and really, believe it or not, they're spread out all over the world in most of the tropics. They don't need that cold temp.
You know,
they
can keep warm.
Yeah, you can keep them in that warm, South
Sirens
America.
also keep warm. The amphibians keep warm.
Yeah, I mean they're natives. When you get in natives, as long as you can feel what temp it is outside, you're usually pretty good. Let's see. All right, I'm going to avoid my last one save it for the last because that's my big bang. But we're going to talk about frogs. Arguably, the biggest group is Pipidae, which is their big kind of superfamily. You're going to see there's really 2 branches that we're going to see in the hobby. The first is one that Chris keeps. They're fairly sizable. They're referred to as Suriname toads. It turns out that they're not actually toads. They just call them that because they kind of got weird, warty skin. They're very flat.
This is a very cool species that I learned about in a documentary. They come out of the Amazon. They are definitely a fish hunter. They will eat worms. I found the wild caught ones that I've gotten in the past are very difficult to get into frozen worms, but the captive bred ones, not a problem at all. As Roy said, the flat, they're an ambush predator. But what makes them so unique and very cool, and you can look this up on the internet, is the way they give birth. Is the female will throw a layer of skin on their back over the fertilized eggs, and when the babies are ready to hatch, it's the grossest, the coolest thing ever. It's like
It's completely gross.
Baby froglets just pop out of the skin.
Yes, it is.
But you gotta separate them immediately because the parents will eat the babies.
Those were found in South America, and this family basically formed prior to South America and Africa splitting apart. So what evolved in South America was your Suriname toads. Over in Africa, basically the remnants of that family formed into the African clawed frog.
Very common. The
Yeah.
dwarf ones especially, very common.
And honestly, Paul has
These
some.
are there's a couple of different species
Yes.
of Africans. The Pippins are completely aquatic. They don't need to get out, and they get out, they're awkward.
They're not made for land.
They've evolved to be fully aquatic. They'll come up for air, that's it. Go right back down. Atlanta tanks are great for both of these species. The dwarf clawed African ones
Are probably better suited than some of the other ones. I mean,
Like
some of
fish
the
or-
regular African claws can get sized over,
Yeah.
and they can become
They'll
real
eat
big
fish.
fish eaters.
The dwarf ones, just as long as you keep the fish that aren't going to pick on them.
Yeah.
Very common in the hobby.
Yep.
Pretty easy.
This is probably also a good time to mention chytrid coronavirus because The big African clawed frogs are largely responsible for the chytrid outbreak that's killing amphibian populations everywhere. Because those were actually used in the first pregnancy tests that were developed. Some compound that they produced was a key part of that. So they were being farmed worldwide, and no one was paying any attention to it. But they were dying and being tossed out in the trash, and they're actually a carrier species for the chytrid fungus, which doesn't impact them negatively, but any other frog that it comes in contact with, it'll kill. So this is one of those species where I would recommend testing them. It's not expensive, it's not hard. You take a swab, you swab it, you send it in, it costs $18 for a test. That's it. Secondly, unless you know that they are negative, sterilize the water before you toss it.
And you can see where doing a water change in this tank, all of a sudden now you're literally infecting anywhere downstream of you. You've just infected the toads in your yard, and you can see how this would quickly blossom out.
Right now, there's so much restrictions on it that you don't see newts and salamanders really sold anymore, and they can't be sold across state lines.
Yeah. Well, they actually changed that. So they got.
So it has.
So the Lacey Act was basically what it is. It's a law that before was being used to basically say you can't import these animals into the country and you cannot transport them across state lines. And I think it was last year or the year before. They added almost all newts and salamanders to that list. I think axolotls and tiger salamanders and one or two others. Yeah, even if they're captive bred. Newts and salamanders, almost all of them except axolotls, tigers, and like one or two of the Asian species got added. Yeah. And so you could not transport across state lines, you could not import them. Recently, because 5 or 6 years ago they added Burmese pythons, particular pythons, African rock pythons, and I know greens got added.
Greens were definitely.
Yeah, I don't think yellows got added with the bird. Oh, okay. And then, yeah. So everything's still on there. Everything is still on there, but the reptile lobbying for USARC basically went into the Lacey Act and said, wait, this doesn't actually say anything about interstate.
Yeah.
It's between Alaska, Hawaii, and the continental US.
Yeah, they
That
had to
part of
write
it.
it to make it.
That part of it did get overturned. You can take them across state lines, but you can't transport them from the continental to Alaska or to Hawaii or vice versa. And you cannot import them. Yeah. What's here, though, we can import to the state. But that kind of highlights how big of a problem this is. And oh yeah. We still don't have a cure for it. Still. Yeah.
And arguably the damage has been done.
Yeah.
So
It's there.
you stopping it's not going to halt the issue.
Yeah. And chytrid is treatable. Most people use a Lamisil solution you soak them in for I think it's like 30 minutes twice a day or something like that. And there's instructions online, but that is treatable. The next one is rhinovirus. That is not. Yeah. And that is probably a lot more common.
Yeah. And essentially you either develop an immunity that you pass on to offspring or you only.
And rhinovirus is something that can infect more than a fish. That'll infect turtles and tortoises. It'll infect fish. It'll infect any vertebrate that keeps its body temperature below about 90 degrees. 85 to 90 degrees. Yeah, exactly. 85 to 90 degrees is about that point when rhinovirus can no longer range. But anything below that can be infected. Yeah. But anything below that can be infected, and some species will not care. It won't harm them in any way. I had a group of Hyperoleus first for Tony, little African reed frogs that I got in, and they had it. They were infected. They did not give two shits. They were just carrying on. But if I had brought those out of quarantine and set them in a tank next to my dart frogs, if that had gotten over, all my dart frogs would be dead as dirt. And so you really have to be careful. Yeah, you really have to be careful when you're dealing with those diseases that you don't introduce them to your other animals, because if you do, you don't know what it's going to kill and what's going to be fine. Yeah. And again, it's a risk of infecting native animals.
The last real critter on my list, they are all illegal. I'll just go ahead and they're all endangered, all critically endangered. They are way too huge for most people, and they don't have the setup, but they're awesome. It's the Cryptobranchus line, which arguably is found in China, Japan, and these are the giant salamanders. Chinese giants, the Japanese giant salamanders, and over the U.S. we have two species of hellbenders. They call them Allegheny alligators. There's a whole bunch of snot otter was my favorite from this morning. The list. I love that one. That is an awesome name. Usually these get upwards of 2 to up to 6 feet. Some of
There's about
There are
two, the Asian
wild
ones.
China. They have a list of that.
Yeah.
The wild China documentary.
Yeah, these are massive. They've got a lot of folds on their skin, and they actually absorb oxygen that way. They live in very cold water. We're talking, down to 40, 50 degrees. You try to keep those in anything else, and it would just not be happy. They are huge fish, and they bite.
As far as I know, in the United
There's a
States,
bunch of them.
the Steinhardt Museum in Golden Gate Park, San Francisco, used to have one. This was 30 years ago. That now they can live a long time, but I don't know how long they've had it. I don't know if they still have it.
Yeah. And they're coming back. We're trying to focus, but they're found mostly in the Ozark region here in the U.S. Ozarks up to like Pennsylvania, the Appalachian mountain range area. These are real cold things. Usually, the fishermen will come across them when they're fly fishing, and they'll live under rocks and they'll bite. They'll bite because the fishermen will flip over rocks looking for little flies, and they'll get bit that way. Generally, they're big. They're very mean. They're very aggressive. Probably not on anybody's list of weird aquatic things, but I like to be thorough. I like to be thorough.
Also, they've got some.
Yeah.
Almost everything on this with the exception of flowers.
Yeah. Any questions? Anybody with any questions? Reptiles and amphibians? I think we've tried to cover them all.
Yeah, I had looked at the aquarium before and trying to find a small chiller in the aquarium. Like smaller chillers are kind of hard to find. Maybe are there effective ones out there?
There are, but they're
Those chillers are being designed to reach. And generally, like people with real big diseases like that, that are being bad.
Yeah.